College alien werewolf girl keeps feeding me extra, says humans need more meat. There is a distinct, terrifying beauty in being cared for by something capable of tearing a bulkhead door off its hinges. We often tell stories of humans conquering the stars with lasers and fleets and diplomatic immunity. But sometimes the conquest happens in a quiet corner of a mess hall with nothing more than a plastic tray and a misunderstanding of biology. Anna does not care about Roger's GPA or his knowledge of galactic trade laws. She cares about his caloric density. She views his survival as her personal project. This is a story about the moment a human realizes he is not the hunter in the relationship, but he is certainly the prize. The ambient roar of the Nexiu main dining facility was less of a sound and more of a physical pressure that vibrated against the sternum. Thousands of students from hundreds of systems were crammed into a space designed to accommodate everything from silicon-based life forms that ate rocks to gaseous entities that photosynthesized the artificial light. Roger sat at the edge of this chaos, occupying a small circular table near the waste recyclers. It was a strategic position for a human business major. From here, he could observe the flow of traffic, analyze the social hierarchies of the various cliques, and most importantly, avoid being trampled by the heavy-gravity species that tended to barrel through the center aisles like runaway freight trains. Roger adjusted the cuffs of his button-up shirt, smoothing out the fabric with a deliberate, practiced motion. He was the only human in his dorm block, a statistical anomaly that he had learned to leverage rather than lament. Being the smallest person in the room usually meant you were overlooked, and in the cutthroat world of intergalactic commerce studies, being overlooked was a tactical advantage. You heard things people did not think you were listening to. You saw deals made in shadows because no one thought the little mammalian biped was a threat. He stared at the holographic menu floating above the table's surface, the blue light reflecting in his eyes as he did the mental math on his credit balance. The exchange rate between Earth credits and the local Nexa currency had fluctuated wildly over the last week, thanks to a mining strike in the Outer Rim, and Roger was currently operating on a budget that could best be described as optimistic. A standard nutrient paste was affordable, but it tasted like wet chalk and sadness. A proper protein slab, the kind that actually required chewing, would set him back enough credits to jeopardize his laundry budget for the month. He tapped his finger against the table, a rhythmic sound lost in the din of clattering trays and alien languages. He decided on the nutrient paste. It was efficient. It was logical. It was the choice of a man who prioritized long-term fiscal stability over short-term gustatory pleasure. He reached out to select the icon for the gray sludge, resigning himself to another lunch of textureless sustenance. The light from the overhead fixtures suddenly vanished. It was not a power outage. The bustling noise of the cafeteria did not dip, nor did the emergency klaxon sound. The darkness was localized entirely to Roger's table. He paused, his finger hovering inches above the holographic interface, and looked up. The light had been blocked by a mountain. Standing directly behind his chair, casting a shadow that engulfed his entire world, was Anna. She was a lycanthropian, a species known across the galaxy for their terrifying combat prowess, their unwavering loyalty, and their absolute lack of volume control. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her shoulders broad enough to block a corridor, covered in luxurious dark gray fur that shimmered with a silver sheen under the cafeteria lights. She was wearing a standard-issue Nexiu school uniform, a pleated skirt, and a white blouse that strained valiantly against muscles designed to wrestle prey to the ground. Her hazel eyes, burning like dying stars, were fixed downward directly at the top of Roger's head. Roger did not flinch. Flinching triggered a chase instinct in lycanthropes, and he had no intention of being chased through the salad bar. Instead, he slowly retracted his hand from the menu and turned his chair, looking up, and further up until he met her gaze. Anna was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that suggested she had either just run a marathon or was trying to suppress a growl. Her ears, triangular and tufted with black fur, swiveled forward, focusing entirely on him. The air around her smelled of pine forests, cold rain, and a hint of high-grade predatory musk. It was an intimidating scent, one that usually sent herbivores scurrying for the exits, but Roger just blinked. He knew Anna from his intro to macroeconomics class. She sat 3 rows behind him, and usually spent the lecture shredding her stylus with her claws whenever the professor mentioned taxation rates. She did not say hello. She did not ask if the seat was taken. She simply leaned forward, her massive hands gripping the edge of his table. The metal composite groaned under the pressure. Then, with a movement so fast it blurred, she swung a large metal tray from behind her back and slammed it down in front of him. The impact caused Roger's water cup to jump 2 inches into the air. The tray was not filled with nutrient paste. It was piled high, a chaotic mountain of roasted meats, bone-in cuts that sizzled with heat, and a side of dense, fibrous root vegetables that looked hard enough to crack a tooth. The aroma hit Roger like a physical blow, savory, rich, and unmistakably expensive. It was enough food to feed a family of 4 for a week. Roger looked at the mountain of protein, then back up at Anna. Her expression was severe. Her lips were pulled back slightly, revealing the tips of elongated canines that were definitely not designed for eating salad. A low rumble started deep in her throat, a sound that vibrated through the table and into Roger's elbows. It was not aggression, he realized after a moment of panic. It was concern. It was the sound a mother wolf makes when her pup is being particularly stupid. "You are withering," Anna announced. Her voice was a husky contralto that carried over the noise of the cafeteria, causing several nearby tables to fall silent. She pointed a clawed finger at his chest. "I can see the outline of your ribcage through your shirt, Roger. It is unacceptable. The winter semester is approaching. The temperature regulation systems in the dorms are notoriously inefficient. If you do not increase your lipid stores, you will freeze to death before midterms." Roger looked down at his shirt. It was a standard fit, perhaps a little loose because he had been skipping breakfast to study, but he hardly thought he was at death's door. He cleared his throat, his mind racing to find a diplomatic response that would not insult the 7-foot wolf woman who had just bought him 50 credits worth of steak. As a business major, he knew the value of a gift, but he also knew the danger of undefined debts. In Lycan culture, sharing food was not a casual act. It was a binding contract of some sort, usually involving pack dynamics or alliances. "Anna," Roger said, keeping his voice calm and level, pitching it to be heard only by her. "This is a significant amount of biomass. I was just planning on having the nutrient paste. It is formulated for human dietary requirements. I assure you, I am not in danger of freezing. Humans are quite resilient." Anna let out a sharp chuff of air through her nose, a sound of utter dismissal. She pulled out the chair opposite him, the metal screeching against the floor, and sat down. The chair groaned in protest but held. She leaned across the table, her face inches from his. Her hazel eyes scanned his face, searching for signs of weakness. "Resilient," she repeated, the word rolling off her tongue with a skeptical growl. "You have no fur, your skin is soft. Your claws are non-existent. I watched you lift your bag yesterday, Roger. You strained. I heard your breath hitch. You are running on fumes. Humans need meat. Real meat. Not that gray sludge the administration tries to pass off as food. That paste is for herbivores and prey species. Are you prey, Roger?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Roger felt the eyes of the cafeteria on him. He could see a group of reptoids at the next table watching with unblinking fascination, waiting to see if the human would be eaten or adopted. He straightened his spine. This was a negotiation. She was offering resources. If he refused, he would be insulting her judgment and her ability to provide. If he accepted, he was acknowledging her assessment of his weakness. But there was a third option. He could accept the resource not as charity, but as an investment. "I am not prey," Roger said firmly. He picked up the heavy iron fork from the tray she had provided. "But you are correct about the caloric density of the paste. It is suboptimal for high cognitive function. If I am going to help you pass that economics final next week, I suppose I will need the extra energy." The tension in Anna's shoulders instantly evaporated. Her ears perked up and a look of immense satisfaction washed over her lupin features. She had won. She had fed the small, hairless thing. The transaction was complete. She sat back, crossing her arms over her chest, the fabric of her uniform stretching tight. "Eat," she commanded, nodding at the tray. "And do not leave the gristle. That is where the best minerals are." Roger looked at the steak. It was a slab of something clearly native to a high-gravity world, dense and dark red. He cut into it. The meat was tender, surprisingly so, and the juice ran clear and savory. He took a bite. The flavor exploded on his tongue, smoke, spice, and a richness that made his eyes water. It was, without a doubt, the best thing he had eaten since arriving at Nexiu. He took another bite, and then another, his body overriding his brain's attempt to maintain proper table manners. He hadn't realized how hungry he actually was until the protein hit his system. Anna watched him eat with an intensity that would have been unnerving to anyone else. She tracked every movement of the fork to his mouth, her hazel eyes dilating slightly with every swallow he took. She was not eating anything herself. She was simply feeding on the satisfaction of watching him fuel up. It was a primal, possessive gaze. It said, quite clearly, "I am keeping this one alive." As Roger worked his way through the meal, he began to notice the shift in the environment around them. The bubble of space Anna had created was holding. Usually, students would crowd the tables, bumping elbows and spilling drinks. But today, no one came within 3 feet of their table. A large, 4-armed crustacean student walked by, looked at Anna, saw the proprietary way she was watching the human, and immediately diverted his path to walk around the other side of the pillar. Roger realized with a jolt that he was under protection. He had been upgraded from background noise to designated associate of the alpha predator. It was a strange sensation. Roger had spent his entire life relying on his wits, staying invisible, moving through the cracks of the world to avoid getting crushed. He was used to being the one who had to dodge. Now the world was dodging him. He looked at Anna again. She was resting her chin on her hand, her claws tapping lightly against her cheek. She looked almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the violent potential coil of her muscles. "Is it acceptable?" she asked, her voice softer now, though still deep enough to be felt in the floorboards. "It is incredible," Roger admitted, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Thank you, Anna. This is generous, but you didn't get any food for yourself." "I ate before I came here," she lied. Roger knew she was lying because her stomach let out a traitorous growl that sounded like a distant thunderstorm. She ignored it with regal dignity. "I require less frequency, more volume. You require constant input. It is a biological fact. My mother told me humans have metabolisms like hummingbirds. If you stop eating, you drop dead. I will not have my study partner dropping dead. It would be inconvenient for my grades." Roger smiled. It was a small, genuine smile. He knew it wasn't about the grades. Anna was currently carrying a solid B+ average on her own. She didn't need his help to pass. This was something else. This was the instinct to nurture, twisted through the lens of a species that expressed affection through violence and provision. She saw him as small and fragile, and her solution was to build him up, literally, cell by cell, with protein. "We should discuss the exchange rate problem for the midterm," Roger said, pivoting the conversation to safe ground while he continued to eat. "If the mining strike continues, the value of raw ore is going to spike, which means the currency backed by industrial output is going to destabilize." Anna groaned, throwing her head back. The motion exposed the long, vulnerable line of her throat, a display of trust that Roger noted immediately. "Why do you ruin a good meal with talk of imaginary numbers? Roger, the only currency that matters is what you can hold in your hands or put in your stomach. If the economy collapses, I can still hunt. Can you hunt?" "I can negotiate for the meat you hunt," Roger countered, cutting another piece of the steak. "I can draft the contract that ensures you get the best price for your surplus." Anna looked back down at him, a glint of amusement in her eyes. A scavenger, then. A symbiotic organism. I hunt, you negotiate. It is not a terrible arrangement. It is a partnership, Roger corrected. Partnership. Anna tested the word, tasting it. She seemed to like the flavor. Very well, partnership. But partners do not let partners starve. You will eat the root vegetables as well. They are high in calcium. Your bones look brittle. They sat there for the next hour, an island of calm in the chaotic sea of the cafeteria. Roger finished the meal, every bite of it, despite feeling full halfway through. He sensed that leaving food on the plate would be interpreted as a rejection of her care. When he finally pushed the tray away, feeling heavier and warmer than he had in months, Anna nodded in approval. She reached out, and with a casualness that stopped Roger's heart for a split second, brushed a crumb from his shoulder. Her hand was massive, her palm rough and calloused, her claws sharp enough to open an envelope or a jugular vein. But the touch was feather-light. It was a grooming gesture, a claim. Tomorrow, Anna stated, rising from her chair. The movement was fluid and powerful, drawing the eyes of the room once again. We will try the aquatic selection. I have read that fish oils are good for human brain development. You need to keep that brain sharp if you are going to be my negotiator. I didn't agree to be your negotiator, Roger pointed out, standing up as well. He felt dwarfed by her, standing in her shadow, but for the first time the shadow didn't feel cold. It felt like shelter. You ate the steak, Anna said, a smug grin spreading across her muzzle. The contract is signed, Roger. Read the fine print next time. She turned and walked away, her tail swaying behind her with a confident rhythm. Roger watched her go, standing alone at the table with an empty tray and a full stomach. He looked around the cafeteria. The reptoids were still watching him, but their gaze had changed. It was no longer predatory calculation. It was respect. He was the one the wolf girl fed. He was the one she groomed. Roger picked up his bag, slinging it over his shoulder. He felt different. The cold draft from the ventilation system didn't seem to bite as hard as it usually did. He walked toward the tray return conveyor, moving with a new cadence. He was a human, yes. Small, soft, lacking in claws and fur. But he had just been drafted into a pack of two, and as he walked through the crowd, he realized that for the first time since he arrived at Nexu, people were moving out of his way. He stepped out of the cafeteria and into the corridor, the hum of the station's life support systems filling the silence. He thought about the fish oils. He thought about the look in Anna's eyes when he took that first bite. He realized he was actually looking forward to tomorrow's lunch. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the terrifying, wonderful certainty that someone was watching his back, even if they were mostly doing it to make sure he didn't blow away in the wind. Roger smiled to himself, checked his datapad for his next class, and started walking. He had a lot of studying to do. After all, he had to be smart enough to be worth keeping around. The corridors of Nexu were wide, designed to accommodate the diversity of species that roamed them, but they often felt claustrophobic to Roger. Today, however, the space seemed to open up. He passed a group of celestial navigators, ethereal beings of light and gas floating in containment suits, and gave them a polite nod. He felt grounded. The heavy meal sat in his stomach like a ballast stone, keeping him anchored in reality. As he turned the corner toward the business sector, his datapad chimed. It was a message. He swiped the screen, expecting a notification from the registrar or a spam ad for off-world vacation packages. Instead, it was a simple text file from an unregistered ID. Subject: Supplemental Dietary Logic. Message: I checked the nutritional database. The root vegetables were actually tubers from the Sigma-9 system. They boost immune system function. You are welcome. Don't be late for class. Roger stared at the screen. She had looked it up. She had gone out of her way to research the specific biological benefits of the vegetables she had forced him to eat. He felt a warmth rise in his chest that had nothing to do with digestion. This was attention to detail. This was due diligence. In the business world, this was the sign of a partner who did their homework. He typed a quick reply. I appreciate the immune boost. I will see you in macroeconomics. Try not to shred your stylus today." He sent the message and pocketed the device. He could imagine her reading it, her ears flicking back in annoyance, a low growl rumbling in her chest. The image made him chuckle. He wasn't scared. That was the revelation of the day. He stood amidst monsters and titans, amidst creatures that could crush him by accident, and he wasn't scared of the biggest one of them all. He was her investment, and Roger intended to yield a high return. He entered the lecture hall, the tiered seating rising high into the vaulted ceiling. He usually sat near the back, close to the exit. Today he walked down the steps, past the back rows, past the middle ground where the average students coasted. He scanned the room until he saw the familiar dark gray fur near the front. Anna was there, hunched over her desk, her massive frame making the furniture look like dollhouse equipment. She was frowning at a holographic chart, her claws tapping an impatient rhythm on the desk surface. Roger didn't hesitate. He walked down the aisle, the sound of his shoes sharp against the floor. He reached the row where she sat. She looked up as he approached, her hazel eyes widening slightly in surprise. She evidently hadn't expected him to sit with her in class. Lunch was one thing, the academic sphere was another. "Is this seat taken?" Roger asked, gesturing to the empty spot beside her. Anna looked at the seat, then at him, then around the room at the other students who were watching. A slow, sharp grin spread across her face. She reached out and swept her arm across the empty desk, clearing away a pile of her own scattered notes to make room for him. "Sit," she commanded, "but if you distract me, I will bite you." "I would expect nothing less," Roger replied, sitting down. He set up his datapad, aligned his stylus, and prepared for the lecture. He could feel the heat radiating from her arm, inches from his own. It was a solid, reassuring presence. The professor walked in, a multi-limbed insectoid who began chattering about market fluctuations in the course systems. Roger listened, taking notes, but a part of his mind was focused entirely on the space between him and the wolf girl. He was small, he was human, he was soft. But as he sat there, shoulder to shoulder with an apex predator who had decided he was her responsibility, Roger felt like the most powerful thing in the room. He glanced sideways. Anna was engrossed in the lecture, or pretending to be, but her ear was swiveled toward him, listening to his breathing, monitoring his existence. Roger smiled, focused on the holographic projection at the front of the room, and began to work. The winter semester was coming, but for the first time he wasn't worried about the cold. The routine established itself with the terrifying inevitability of a planetary orbit. What began as a single startling incident involving a stake and a misunderstood biological imperative quickly calcified into the most defining feature of Roger's existence at Nexu. It ceased to be an anomaly and became the new standard operating procedure for his daily life. Every day at 1300 hours, the shadow would fall over his table. Every day, the tray would slam down with enough force to rattle the silverware. Every day, Anna would sit opposite him, her massive frame occupying enough cubic volume to qualify as a small vehicle, and she would watch him eat with that same intense, maternal, predatory focus. The menu varied, though the theme remained aggressively carnivorous. One day it was roasted avian legs the size of Roger's forearm, seasoned with a spicy red dust from the equatorial mines of her homeworld. The next, it was a fillet of some aquatic leviathan, seared black on the outside and raw in the middle, smelling of brine and deep ocean pressure. Roger stopped bringing his own lunch. He stopped checking the prices on the holographic menu. He simply showed up, sat down, and waited to be fueled. It was a fascinating study in sociological adaptation. Roger, being a student of commerce and systems, analyzed it while he chewed. He observed that his social credit score, an invisible metric that governed the interactions between species on campus, had skyrocketed. He was no longer the invisible human. He was the human who belonged to the alpha female of the third-year lycanthrope cohort. This distinction carried weight. In the crowded corridors between classes, paths cleared for him. When he stood in line for the turbolifts, larger species, Bulky silicon-based miners and four-armed reptilian scholars would shuffle aside to give him space. They weren't afraid of him specifically. They were afraid of the scent that clung to him. He smelled like Anna now. He smelled like ozone-free thunderstorms and apex predator. To the olfactory-sensitive species of the university, Roger was a walking, "Do not touch" sign painted in pheromones. This protection extended beyond the physical. Anna had taken it upon herself to audit his entire lifestyle. It started with the food, but it soon bled into his schedule. She would intercept him between classes, looming out of a crowd of students like a dark gray monolith, demanding to know if he had slept enough cycles. She critiqued his hydration levels. She once physically lifted him by the back of his collar to move him away from a malfunctioning ventilation unit that was leaking coolant, setting him down 3 feet to the left with the casual ease of someone moving a chess piece. Roger did not complain. He found that fighting the gravity of her care was futile, and frankly, he was enjoying the benefits. His energy levels were higher than they had ever been. The high-protein diet was working. His focus in lectures was razor-sharp. His skin looked better, and he had even put on a few pounds of muscle, though he still looked like a stick figure next to her. However, a partnership, as Roger had boldly claimed on that first day, required reciprocity. A distinct imbalance in the ledger began to gnaw at him. Anna was providing caloric density and physical security. Roger was providing what? The pleasure of being watched. It was not enough. The business major in him rejected the concept of a free ride. Assets had to be leveraged. Value had to be proven. If he was going to be part of this two-person pack, he had to demonstrate that his contribution was just as vital as her brute strength. He needed to find the crack in her armor, the place where her claws and fangs were useless, and fill it with his own specific brand of human competence. The opportunity arrived in the form of a shattered stylus. They were in the campus library, a cavernous structure of glass and silence located in the upper orbital ring of the station. The library was designed for quiet study, but silence was a relative concept when Anna was involved. They were seated in a private pod, a curved alcove with a panoramic view of the nebula swirling outside the station's viewports. Roger was reviewing legal precedents for a case study on interstellar trade disputes. Anna was attempting to complete a structural engineering assignment on her datapad. The air in the pod was thick with her frustration. Roger could feel it radiating off her like heat from a furnace. Her ears were flattened against her skull. Her tail was thumping a rhythmic, agitated beat against the leg of her chair. Then came the snap. It was a sharp, brittle sound. Roger looked up to see Anna holding the two halves of a standard-issue university stylus. She had gripped it too hard. Again. This was the third one this week. She stared at the broken plastic in her massive, furred hand with a look of pure betrayal, as if the inanimate object had failed her on purpose. She let out a low, vibrating growl that barely stayed below the mandatory silence threshold of the library sensors. "This technology is flawed," she hissed, tossing the pieces onto the table. "It is designed for fragile hands. It cannot withstand the pressure required for emphatic calculation. How am I supposed to calculate load-bearing vectors when the tool itself cannot bear the load of my frustration?" Roger set his own datapad down. He looked at the broken stylus, then at Anna's hand. It was a magnificent piece of biology, designed for rending and tearing, for gripping rough bark and struggling prey. It was not designed for the delicate, frictionless surface of a smooth glass screen and a hollow plastic tube. The ergonomics were all wrong for her species. The university provided standard equipment based on a galactic average, and Anna was decidedly above average. "It isn't the technology that is flawed," Roger said quietly. "It is the interface. You are trying to apply torque to a cylinder that has zero structural integrity." Anna glared at him. "Do not use physics words against me, Roger. I am currently very angry at the concept of writing." Roger reached into his bag. He had anticipated this. Over the last few days, he had been observing her struggles. He had noticed the way her claws interfered with the touch sensors, the way she had to contort her grip to keep the stylus steady. He had done some research. He had contacted a custom fabrication major in the engineering department, a Tellarite who owed him a favor for helping him structure a business plan for a side hustle involving bootleg engine parts. Roger had called in that debt. He pulled out a small, rectangular case and slid it across the table. "Open it," he said. Anna looked at the case suspiciously. She sniffed it. It smelled of machine oil and Roger. She reached out with a single claw and flipped the lid open. Inside sat a stylus, but it was unlike the standard plastic sticks dispensed by the vending machines. This one was machined from solid aluminum. It was thick, heavy, and textured with a diamond-cut knurling pattern for maximum grip. The tip was reinforced with a conductive polymer designed for heavy-pressure industrial screens. It looked less like a writing implement and more like a piece of military hardware. Roger watched her face. "The barrel is weighted," he explained, his voice calm and professional. "It has a hexagonal cross-section so it won't roll when you set it down. The grip is etched to accommodate the friction coefficient of your fur, and the core is solid metal. You could stab it through a datapad and it wouldn't break. I had it balanced for your hand size." Anna picked it up. She didn't hold it delicately, she gripped it like a weapon. The metal caught the light of the nebula outside. She tested the weight, tossing it slightly in her palm. A look of wonder replaced the frustration on her face. She brought it to the screen of her datapad and tapped an icon. The response was instant. She drew a line, applying her usual heavy pressure. The stylus didn't bend. It didn't creak. It simply worked. "Where did you get this?" she asked, not looking up, tracing a complex vector diagram with sudden, fluid ease. "I saw a market inefficiency," Roger said, leaning back in his chair. "The standard tools were reducing your productivity. I acquired a specialized tool to restore optimal output. That is what I do, Anna. You feed me meat so I don't die. I give you tools so you don't fail structural engineering. That is the trade." Anna stopped writing. She turned her head slowly to look at him. The intensity of her hazel eyes was overwhelming at this distance. Usually she looked at him with concern or proprietary amusement. This time there was something else, respect, genuine intellectual respect. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that his smallness was not a lack of power. It was a condensation of it. He had observed a problem she couldn't solve with strength, and he had solved it with foresight. She reached out with her free hand. Roger braced himself, expecting a pat on the shoulder or perhaps a friendly shove. Instead, she laid her hand over his forearm. Her palm was warm, dry, and engulfed his arm completely. She squeezed, just gently enough to register the power she was holding back. "You are a very useful creature, Roger," she said softly. Her voice dropped an octave, vibrating through his radius and ulna. "I will have to ensure you get the high-grade venison tomorrow. The standard beef is clearly insufficient payment for this level of service." It was a joke, but it wasn't. It was an acknowledgement of the contract. Roger smiled, feeling a flush of pride that he carefully kept off his face. "I prefer the venison," he said. "It has a better iron profile." They worked in silence for the rest of the session, but the dynamic had shifted. It was no longer a mother wolf guarding a pup. It was two professionals operating in sync. The silence was comfortable, heavy with the thrum of the station's engines and the scratching of her new stylus against the screen. Roger found himself watching her work, admiring the focus in her eyes, the way her ears twitched whenever a ship docked in the distance. He was beginning to learn her language. A twitch of the left ear meant she was calculating. A twitch of the right meant she was annoyed. A slow blink meant she was content. The walk back to the dorms that evening solidified the shift. Usually, Anna walked a step ahead of him, clearing the path. Tonight she slowed her pace, matching her long, loping stride to his shorter, bipedal gait. They walked side by side. The corridors were dim, the station cycling into its night cycle. The artificial lights dimmed to a soft amber, mimicking a sunset. Roger felt a boldness rising in him. He wanted to push the boundary just a little. He wanted to see how much of the pet label had been erased. "Tell me about your home," he said, breaking the silence. You mentioned the mines and the forests. Anna looked down at him, her silhouette dark against the amber lights. It is loud, she said, not like here. Here the noise is just clutter, machines, voices, static. On my world the noise is alive. The wind howls through the canyons, the beasts scream in the night, the trees groan when the storms come. It is a world that tries to kill you every day. That is why we are strong. If you stop moving, the moss eats you. If you show weakness, the pack leaves you. She paused, looking forward again. It is lonely here. Everyone is so polite. They apologize when they bump into you. They use words to hide their teeth. I miss the honesty of a growl. Roger considered this. He thought about the polite, sanitized world of Earth, where aggression was buried under layers of bureaucracy and passive-aggressive emails. He understood the isolation she felt. She was a creature of raw authenticity living in a world of synthetic manners. Humans are not so different, Roger said. We just hide our growls better. We built cities to keep the nature out, but the instinct is still there. We just channel it into business, into art, into survival. Anna glanced at him. Is that why you are so calm? I have seen you negotiate with the Tellarites. They are loud. They spit. You just sit there and wait for them to run out of breath. Endurance hunting, Roger said. That is how humans evolved. We aren't the fastest. We aren't the strongest, but we don't stop. We walk the prey down. We follow it for days, miles, until it collapses from exhaustion. Then we eat. In business, it is the same. I don't have to be louder than the Tellarite. I just have to wait until he makes a mistake. Anna stopped walking. They were in front of the junction that separated the heavy gravity dorms from the standard habitation block. She turned to face him fully. She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time, stripping away the layers of his button-up shirt and seeing the ancient biology beneath. Endurance, she repeated. She stepped closer. The space between them vanished. She loomed over him, but this time Roger didn't feel small. He felt dense, solid. You have endurance, Roger, she murmured. I see it. You endure my feeding. You endure the staring. You endure the weight of my company when others run away. She leaned down. Her face was inches from his. He could feel the warmth of her breath, smell the scent of pine and wild things. For a second he thought she might bite him, or kiss him, or both. The line between the two seemed dangerously thin with her. Keep enduring, she whispered. It is a good trait. She straightened up abruptly, the moment breaking like a snapped twig. She turned toward her dorm corridor, her tail swishing behind her. Don't be late for breakfast, she called back over her shoulder. I am getting bacon, real bacon, from a pig the size of a shuttlecraft. I'll be there, Roger replied. He watched her go until she rounded the corner. He stood alone in the junction, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He realized then that he wasn't just enduring. He was thriving. He had walked into the den of the wolf, and instead of being eaten, he had been offered a seat at the fire. He touched his arm where she had squeezed it. The phantom pressure of her hand still lingered. He turned and walked toward his own dorm. His room would be quiet, it would be empty, it would be safe. But for the first time the safety felt sterile. He missed the noise, he missed the danger, he missed her. Roger entered his room and threw his bag on the bed. He walked to the small viewport that looked out into the darkness of space. He saw his reflection in the glass, a small, pale man in a button-up shirt. But behind his eyes he saw something new, a spark of something wild that Anna had ignited. He wasn't just a business major anymore. He was the endurance hunter, and he had found the only thing in the galaxy worth chasing. He sat down at his desk and pulled up the nutritional charts for lycanthropes. If she was bringing bacon from a shuttlecraft-sized pig, he needed to research the cholesterol implications. He needed to be prepared. He needed to be useful, because tomorrow the wolf was coming back, and Roger wanted to be ready to run with her. The connection had been forged in protein and aluminum. Now it was time to test how much weight it could hold. The university was a big place, filled with variables and threats, but Roger knew one thing for certain. He was no longer facing it alone. The pack had formed, and God help anyone who tried to break it. He tapped his screen, bringing up a new file. He titled it Long-Term Acquisition Strategy, ANA. Then he deleted the title. It felt too cold, too transactional. He stared at the blinking cursor for a moment, then typed a new header. Project More Meat. He smiled, closed the file, and turned off the light. In the darkness, he slept better than he had in years. The fear was gone. The hunger remained, and tomorrow he would feed. The academic quadrangle of Nexiu was designed to be a sanctuary, a synthesized merging of a dozen different biomes intended to make the diverse student body feel vaguely at home, or at least not actively hostile toward the environment. There were patches of purple moss for the silicon-based life forms, heated rock gardens for the reptilians, and a sprawling, manicured lawn of earth import grass that smelled of chlorophyll and nostalgia. It was here, under the simulated light of a G-type star, that the hierarchy of the university was most visible. The prey species stuck to the open paths where visibility was high. The predators claimed the shade of the towering, genetically modified oaks, and walking right down the center of the main thoroughfare, disrupting every established social algorithm, were Roger and Anna. They had fallen into a rhythm that was almost marital in its predictability. Anna walked with her usual heavy, ground-eating stride, her backpack looking comically small against the expanse of her shoulders. Roger walked beside her, no longer scurrying to keep up, but matching her pace with a brisk, efficient gait that he had developed over the last few weeks of high-protein fueling. He was carrying 2 coffees, one standard size for him, and one bucket-sized, reinforced thermal container for her. She had developed a taste for caffeine recently, likely because Roger had explained its utility in maximizing study hours, and Anna approached caffeine consumption with the same intensity she applied to meat eating. If a little was good, a lethal amount was better. The air was crisp, the temperature regulators set to a cool autumnal breeze that ruffled Anna's fur and made Roger grateful for the wool sweater he had purchased with his latest stipend. They were discussing the upcoming orbital mechanics exam. Or rather, Roger was explaining the concept of Delta 5, while Anna listened with her ears swiveled forward, occasionally interjecting with questions that were surprisingly insightful for someone who solved most physics problems by hitting them until they broke. It was a peaceful moment. It was the kind of moment that lulls you into forgetting that you are a soft, hairless primate walking beside a creature that shares 90% of its DNA with a nightmare. Roger felt safe. He felt established. He felt, foolishly, like he had figured out the rules of the game. Then the path ahead of them went dark. It wasn't a cloud. It was a wall of muscle and aggression named Torian. He was a lycanthrope like Anna, but he was built differently. If Anna was a sleek, powerful hunter designed for speed and precision, Torian was a siege engine. His fur was a matted, rusty red, scarred in places that suggested he enjoyed fighting a little too much. He stood in the center of the path, flanked by 2 other members of his pack, smaller, younger males who looked at him with a mix of reverence and terror. Torian did not look at Roger. To Torian, Roger was part of the scenery, like a dropped wrapper or a scurrying beetle. His burning yellow eyes were fixed entirely on Anna. The silence that fell over the quad was immediate and absolute. Conversations died. Students on the lawn froze, their instincts screaming that violence was imminent. The birds, or the mechanical drones that looked like birds, stopped singing. Roger felt the change in the air pressure before he saw Anna react. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in a second. Anna stopped. She did not step back. She did not flinch. She simply ceased forward motion and became a statue carved from granite and rage. Her ears flattened against her skull until they were invisible in her fur. Her lips peeled back, not in a smile, not in a grimace, but in a clear biological warning that exposed gums and teeth designed to crush bone. A low sound started in her chest, a rumble so deep it wasn't heard so much as felt in the soles of Roger's shoes. It was the sound of a tectonic plate shifting before an earthquake. Torian, the Red Wolf, spoke first. His voice was like gravel grinding in a mixer. "You act the alpha, Anna, but you smell like a nursemaid." He took a step forward, invading her personal space with deliberate arrogance. The two younger wolves behind him snickered, a high-pitched, yipping sound that grated on Roger's nerves. "We have watched you," Torian continued, gesturing vaguely at Roger with a clawed hand without actually looking at him. "You share your kills. You give your meat to this thing. It is embarrassing. The pack laughs at you. You are fattening a pet when you should be hunting mates." Anna's growl escalated in volume. Her hands, hanging at her sides, curled into fists. The sound of her claws digging into her own palms was audible. Roger saw the muscles in her legs coil. She was calculating the jump. She was going to tear his throat out. It would be a magnificent fight. It would also be the end of her academic career. The university had a zero-tolerance policy for interspecies violence, especially among the Class 5 predator species. If she struck him, she would be expelled. Her visa would be revoked. She would be sent back to her homeworld in disgrace, her future in structural engineering reduced to dust. Torian knew this. He was baiting her. He wanted her to strike first so he could claim self-defense and eliminate a rival for the top ranking in the cohort. It was a brute force trap, simple and effective. Roger looked at Anna. Her eyes were glazed with instinct. She wasn't thinking about credits or degrees anymore. She was thinking about blood. She was about to throw everything away because this rusted hulk of a bully had insulted her pride. Roger took a breath. It was a deep, steadying breath that filled his lungs with the scent of pine and impending violence. He took a step forward. He didn't step away from the danger. He stepped directly into the space between Anna and Torian. The movement was so unexpected that Torian actually blinked. He looked down, his yellow eyes focusing on the small human standing in his shadow. Roger looked up, and up. Torian was massive, a tower of red fur and bad intentions. His breath smelled of raw meat and copper. "Did the pet get lost?" Torian sneered, leaning down. His face was inches from Roger. "Move, little thing, before I step on you." Roger did not move. He adjusted his glasses. He shifted the coffees to his left hand, freeing his right. He didn't look afraid. He looked bored. He looked like he was inspecting a spreadsheet that had a formatting error. "Torian of the Red Ridge clan, correct?" Roger asked. His voice was not loud, but it was projected with the crisp, distinct enunciation of a man who had spent 3 years presenting business proposals to councils of hostile aliens. Torian paused. The use of his full clan name confused him. Confusion was the enemy of aggression. It created a gap in the instinctual loop. "What?" Torian grunted. Roger reached into his pocket and pulled out his datapad. He tapped the screen a few times, the light illuminating his face with a cool blue glow. He didn't look at Torian. He looked at the data. "You are a third-year student in macrobiology on a provisional merit scholarship," Roger recited, his tone flat and administrative. "Your visa is a Class 4 student exchange permit, sponsored by the Galactic Heavy World Initiative. Clause 7. Subsection B of that sponsorship agreement states that any recipient involved in a violent altercation, initiated or otherwise, on university grounds results in an immediate suspension of funds and a mandatory deportation review." Torian straightened up slightly. The growl in his throat faltered. Why was the little meat snack quoting legal codes? "I don't care about words," Torian spat, though he sounded less certain now. "I care about strength. Anna is weak. She keeps a weak thing." Roger finally looked up from the pad. He met Torian's yellow eyes with a gaze that was terrifyingly calm. It was the gaze of a predator, but not a biological one. It was the gaze of a financial predator, a bureaucratic assassin. "You are confusing physical mass with power," Torian, Roger said. "That is a freshman mistake. Let me explain the reality of your situation." Roger took a step closer to the giant wolf. The crowd watching held its breath. "If you touch her, she will hurt you. That is a fact. She is faster than you and she is smarter than you, but she will get expelled." Roger paused, letting the silence hang. "However, if you touch me, That is a different category of disaster. He tapped the data pad again. I am a protected minority species on this campus. My tuition is paid by the Terran Integration Grant. If you lay a single claw on a human student, it is not a fight. It is a hate crime. The university administration doesn't just expel you for that. They freeze your assets. They blacklist your clan from all trade agreements with the Sol system. Roger looked over Torian's shoulder at the two younger wolves. They were listening. They looked nervous. Your pack mates know this, Roger continued, raising his voice just enough to be heard by the entourage. If Torian strikes me, he goes home in shackles, but the investigation will cover his associates too. Your scholarships, gone. Your visas, revoked. Your families back home who are relying on you to send credits, they starve. The two younger wolves took a synchronized step back. They distanced themselves from their leader instantly. The pack bond was strong, but the fear of bureaucratic annihilation was stronger. Torian looked around. He saw his support crumbling. He saw the students on the lawn recording the interaction on their devices. He looked back at Roger, and for the first time, he saw the trap. He wasn't fighting a physical opponent. He was fighting a web of laws, regulations, and financial consequences that he couldn't claw his way out of. Roger stood his ground. He looked small, fragile, and absolutely lethal. So here is the deal, Roger said, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Torian and Anna could hear. You are going to step aside. You are going to walk to the other side of the quad, and you are never going to speak to Anna or me again. Because if you do, I won't fight you. I will file a harassment suit that will bury you in so much paperwork you won't see the sky for a decade. I will bankrupt your future before you can lift a hand. Roger smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. It didn't reach his eyes. Run along, Torian. The adults are talking. Torian stood there for a long, agonizing moment. His chest heaved. His claws flexed. He wanted to kill the human. Every instinct in his body screamed for it, but the seed of doubt had been planted deep. He looked at Anna. She hadn't moved. She was watching Roger with an expression that Torian couldn't parse. It wasn't shame. It wasn't pity. It was something else entirely. Torian let out a huff of frustration. He spat on the ground near Roger's feet, a petty, final gesture of defiance, and then turned. Waste of meat, he muttered. He shouldered past his own pack mates and stomped away, heading toward the far side of the campus. The two younger wolves scrambled to follow him, keeping their heads down, terrified that the small human might decide to sue them just for looking at him. The path was clear. Roger watched them go until they disappeared behind a grove of alien ferns. Only then did he let out the breath he had been holding. His knees felt a little watery. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He adjusted his glasses again, a nervous tick returning now that the danger had passed. He turned to Anna. I believe that resolves the obstruction, Roger said, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. He cleared his throat. We should hurry. We don't want to be late for the orbital mechanics review. He started to walk, but he didn't get far. A heavy hand landed on his shoulder. It wasn't the crushing grip of anger. It was an anchor. Roger stopped. He looked up. Anna was looking down at him. The rage had drained from her face, replaced by a shock so profound it looked almost like pain. Her hazel eyes were wide, the pupils blown completely black. She was breathing hard, her chest rising and falling, but her gaze was locked on his face. She looked at his small hands. She looked at his button-up shirt. She looked at the datapad he was still clutching like a shield. She started, but the word died in her throat. She had spent weeks feeding him because she thought he was weak. She had protected him because she thought he was fragile. She had viewed him as something precious but helpless, like a glass ornament that needed to be kept on a high shelf. But she had just watched him dismantle a rival alpha without throwing a punch. He hadn't used claws. He had used words. He had used the system. He had wielded the abstract concepts of law and finance like a knife, and he had gutted Torian right there in the sunlight. It was the most terrifyingly competent thing she had ever seen. For a lycanthrope, violence was the language of power. But Roger spoke a dialect she didn't know, a dialect that was quieter, cleaner, and infinitely more dangerous. He hadn't just endured, he had dominated. "You did not fight," Anna whispered. Her voice was husky, trembling with a strange new energy. You hunted him with rules." "It was the only tactical option," Roger explained, trying to sound rational despite the way her intensity was making his skin prickle. "Physically, he outclassed me by a factor of 10. Engagement would have resulted in severe bodily harm. Asphyxiation of his resources was the most efficient neutralization strategy." "Efficient," Anna repeated. She stepped closer. The heat coming off her body was immense. She smelled of adrenaline and musk, a potent, dizzying combination. She reached out and took the coffee cup from his hand. She didn't drink it. She just held it, as if she needed to do something with her hands to keep from grabbing him. "I thought you were a scavenger," she murmured, leaning down until her forehead was almost touching his. "I thought you were a gatherer, but you are not." She inhaled deeply, taking in his scent. "You are a killer, Roger, a cold, quiet killer." Roger swallowed hard. "I'm a business major, Anna." "Same thing," she growled softly. The dynamic between them shattered and reformed in that instant. The maternal condescension was gone, vaporized. In its place was something raw and heavy. She wasn't looking at a child she needed to feed. She was looking at a mate who could stand beside her in the shield wall. She was looking at an equal. The students around them were starting to move again, the spell broken, but Roger and Anna were caught in their own gravity well. Roger felt a flush rise up his neck. He had never been looked at like this, like he was dangerous, like he was wanted not for his vulnerability but for his strength. "We should go," Roger said again, though he made no move to leave. "Yes," Anna said. She straightened up, but she didn't step back. She stayed close, her arm brushing against his as they turned to resume their walk. But she didn't take the lead this time. She didn't walk ahead to clear the path. She walked exactly beside him. Her posture had changed. She held her head high, her tail swishing with a proud, rhythmic cadence. She cast a glance at the other students on the quad, the reptoids, the avians, the heavy-set Ursines. Her look was a challenge. It said, "Look at him. Look at what belongs to me. Try him if you dare." They walked in silence for a minute, the tension between them pulling tight like a wire. "Roger," Anna asked. "Yes." "Next time," she said, staring straight ahead, her voice perfectly even, "when you destroy someone's life like that, warn me first." "Why?" Roger asked. "Because," she said, a small, sharp smile touching the corner of her mouth, "it was extremely attractive, and I need to be prepared for that." Roger tripped. He actually stumbled over his own feet. He caught himself before he fell, adjusting his glasses frantically to hide his face. He heard Anna chuckle, a deep, throaty sound that was entirely different from her usual laugh. It was warmer, darker. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. His brain was offline, rebooting to process the information that the 7-foot-tall wolf girl found his litigious nature arousing. He just gripped his data pad tighter and kept walking. They reached the science building. The automatic doors slid open. As they stepped into the cool, recycled air of the lobby, Anna leaned in one last time. "Tonight," she said, "no cafeteria." Roger looked at her. "Where are we eating?" "My room," she said. "I have a hot plate and I have steaks. Better than the cafeteria, just us." It wasn't a question. It was an invitation, delivered with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Yes," Roger managed to say. "That sounds efficient." "Good," Anna said. She patted his shoulder, but the gesture was different now. It wasn't a pat. It was a squeeze, a lingering, possessive touch that sent a jolt of electricity down his spine. She walked off toward her engineering class, her hips swaying with a confident, predatory grace. Roger stood in the lobby, watching her go. He realized his hands were shaking. He realized he was smiling. He realized that he had just won the biggest negotiation of his life, and the payout was going to be complicated, dangerous, and absolutely magnificent. He looked at his reflection in the polished metal of the elevator doors. The small, buttoned-up human looked back. "Well done," he whispered to himself. He stepped into the elevator. He had an exam to take, and then he had a dinner date with a wolf. Roger pressed the button for the upper floors, feeling lighter than zero gravity. The hunt was over. The partnership was ratified. Now came the merger, and Roger had a feeling that the negotiations were just getting started. The heavy-gravity dormitory sector of Nexiu was not designed for human comfort. It was built for species that evolved on worlds where the atmospheric pressure could crush a submarine, and the gravity could snap a human femur like a dry twig. As Roger stepped out of the transit lift and onto the deck of Sector 4, the first thing that hit him was the sound. It wasn't the polite hum of the administration levels. It was a deep, resonant thrumming, the sound of heavy machinery working overtime to maintain environmental containment for 1,000 beings who were essentially biological tanks. The air was thicker here, richer in oxygen and heavy with humidity, smelling of damp earth, heated metal, and the musk of 100 different predator species. Most humans avoided this sector entirely. The corridors were wider, the ceilings higher, and the lighting was kept at a dim, amber twilight that mimicked the dusky suns of the frontier worlds. Roger adjusted his collar, feeling the sweat prickle at the back of his neck. He wasn't sweating from the heat, though it was certainly warm. He was sweating because he was walking into the den of the wolf, and for the first time he wasn't doing it as a friend or a study partner. He was doing it as a potential mate. The invitation had been explicit in its subtext. No cafeteria, just us. The shift from the public performance of the mess hall to the private intimacy of her living quarters was a boundary crossing that carried immense weight in lycanthropian culture. Roger had done his research. In the business world, you never walked into a merger meeting without knowing the cultural protocols. Among honest people, inviting someone into your personal territory to share a kill, or in this case, a steak cooked on a hot plate, was a declaration of trust that bordered on a marriage proposal. He reached door 4B9. The door was made of reinforced blast steel designed to withstand the temper tantrums of a homesick apex predator. There was no doorbell. You had to knock. Roger raised his hand and rapped his knuckles against the cold metal. The sound was pathetic, a tinny tink-tink that was instantly swallowed by the ambient roar of the sector. He frowned, feeling ridiculous. He raised his fist to knock harder, but before he could make contact, the door hissed and slid open. Anna stood in the threshold. She wasn't wearing her school uniform. That was the second shock to his system. She was wearing casual wear, loose-fitting trousers made of some soft, gray fabric and a tank top that left her arms and shoulders completely bare. Without the structured blouse of the academy, the sheer density of her musculature was on full display. The definition in her deltoids, the power in her biceps, the thick cords of muscle in her forearms, it was breathtaking. She looked less like a student and more like a warrior taking a breath between battles. Her fur, usually groomed to a sleek shine for class, looked softer, fluffier, as if she had just brushed it out. She smelled of sandalwood and seared meat. "You knocked like a mouse," she said, but there was no bite in her voice. She stepped back, granting him entry. "Come inside, Roger. The heat is escaping." Roger stepped over the threshold and the door slid shut behind him, sealing out the noise of the corridor instantly. The silence in the room was profound. The air was warm, significantly warmer than the hallway, almost tropical. It was a large room, sparse and utilitarian in a way that spoke of a mind that valued function over form. There was a bed that looked more like a raised platform covered in furs, a desk dominated by 3 monitors displaying complex structural load diagrams, and a small kitchenette in the corner where a cast-iron skillet was smoking gently on a heating element. "It smells good," Roger said, his voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. "It is loin of Krell," Anna replied, walking past him toward the kitchenette. She moved differently in her own space. There was no constraint in her motion, no subconscious effort to make herself smaller for the sake of the other students. She moved with a fluid, expansive grace, her tail swaying lazily behind her. I had it shipped in. It costs a fortune in credits, but the local beef is lacking in spirit. She picked up a pair of tongs and flipped the meat in the pan. The sizzle was aggressive, sending a plume of savory steam into the air. Roger walked further into the room, his eyes scanning the space. He was looking for clues for the pieces of Anna that she didn't bring to the cafeteria. He saw a shelf lined with physical books, rare and heavy, about architecture and physics. He saw a small, rough-hewn stone statue on her nightstand, a carving of a wolf howling at a jagged moon. It was a piece of home. It looked old, worn smooth by touch. It was a reminder that she wasn't just a student at a space station. She was an exile from a world of wild, violent beauty. "Sit," Anna commanded, gesturing to a small table near the viewport. She had set it with 2 plates, real ceramic plates, not the plastic trays of the dining hall, and she had set out silverware, heavy iron utensils that looked hand-forged. Roger sat. The chair was too big for him, his feet barely touching the floor, but he didn't care. He watched her cook. There was a domesticity to the scene that felt surreal. The most dangerous creature in the business school was currently fretting over the sear on a steak for him. She plated the meat, adding a side of the same roasted root vegetables she had forced on him that first week, and brought the plates to the table. She sat down opposite him. The table was small. Her knees brushed against his under the surface. Neither of them pulled away. "Eat," she said softly. Roger cut into the meat. It was perfect. Rare, tender, seasoned with something that tasted like peppercorn but sharper. He took a bite and sighed. It was the best meal he had ever tasted, amplified by the context of where he was and who he was with. "It's amazing, Anna," he said, looking up at her. She wasn't eating. She was watching him again, but the look had evolved. In the cafeteria, her gaze had been maternal, checking to see if the runt of the litter was gaining weight. Now, in the amber light of her room, her gaze was searching. It was vulnerable. She looked at his hands holding the heavy knife and fork. She looked at his throat. She looked at his eyes. "Why did you do it?" she asked suddenly. Roger paused, the fork halfway to his mouth. "Do what?" "Defend me," she said. "In the quad. You stood between me and Torian. You are small, Roger. I do not mean that as an insult. It is physics. Torian weighs 400 pounds. If he had decided to ignore your words and simply swipe his hand, he would have broken your neck. You knew that. I saw your heart rate on the monitor in the medical bay once. I know your physiology. You were terrified, but you stood there." She leaned forward, her hazel eyes locking onto his. "Why risk your life for a lawsuit? Why risk your life for me?" Roger set the fork down. The playful banter of the afternoon was gone. This was the core of it. This was the question that had been hanging between them since he first accepted her tray of food. Why were they doing this? What was the logic behind a partnership that defied every biological imperative? He thought about the business answer. He could talk about asset protection, about long-term investment strategies. But that felt cheap here in the warmth of her room. He looked at the statue of the wolf on her nightstand. He looked at the scars on her arms, faint silver lines under the fur, marks of a life lived in a world that tried to kill you. "Because you looked lonely," Roger said. Anna blinked. She pulled back slightly, surprised. "Lonely? I am never alone. I have the pack. I have the cohort." "You have people who are afraid of you," Roger corrected gently. "Or people who want to challenge you. Or people who want to use you for your strength. You have a lot of noise around you, Anna. But that day in the cafeteria, when you slammed that tray down, you didn't look like an alpha. You looked like someone who had a lot of care to give and no one safe to give it to." He reached out. It was a terrifying risk. He laid his hand on top of hers. His hand was pale, hairless, and small. Her hand was massive, covered in dark fur, tipped with black claws that could shred steel. The contrast was stark. It was the visual definition of the difference between them. "You were terrified I was going to break," Roger said quietly. "That's why you started feeding me, isn't it? You read those medical journals and you saw a creature that dies if the temperature drops 10 degrees, a creature with no armor, no weapons. It scared you. Anna looked down at their hands. She turned her hand over slowly, careful not to let her claws graze his skin until she was clasping his hand. Her palm was rough, hot, and dry. She squeezed, testing the structure of his bones, but with a gentleness that broke his heart. I read that human bones are porous, she whispered. I read that your skin tears under 5 pounds of pressure. I looked at you in class, sitting there with your little stylus, and I thought, he is going to shatter. The universe is so heavy, Roger, and you look so light. I wanted to anchor you. I wanted to make you heavy enough to survive. She looked up, her eyes wet. Vulnerability in a predator is a rare and dangerous thing. It is usually a fatal flaw, but here it was a gift. I was afraid that if I stopped watching you for 1 second, you would disappear, she confessed. That you would just blow away. Roger tightened his grip. He squeezed her hand as hard as he could. It probably felt like nothing to her, barely a pressure, but he put his entire will into it. I'm not glass, Anna, he said firmly. I'm not porcelain. You're looking at the biology, but you're missing the history. Do you know how humans hunted on Earth before we had lasers, before we had rifles? Anna shook her head slowly. We walked, Roger said. We didn't have claws, we didn't have fur. We weren't fast, but we could sweat. We could cool our bodies while we moved, so we would find a gazelle, something fast, beautiful, and strong, and we would chase it. It would run away, leaving us in the dust, but we would keep walking. We would track it, it would run again. We would keep walking for hours, for days, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. We are the monsters that don't stop, Anna. We are the endurance hunters. He leaned in, his voice fierce. I can take the weight. I can take the noise of your world. I stood up to Torian not because I have a death wish, but because I knew I could outlast him. I could outthink him. You don't have to worry about me shattering. I might bend, but I don't break. I am tougher than I look. Anna stared at him. She was processing this reframe. She was looking at the small hand in hers and seeing not a fragility to be protected, but a different kind of strength. A tensile strength. The strength of a wire that can hold a suspension bridge. Endurance hunter, she murmured, testing the words. She liked them. They fit into her worldview. They gave him a rank. Yes, Roger said. So stop treating me like a glass doll. Treat me like a partner. If we are going to do this, whatever this is, I need you to know that I can handle you. All of you. The growling, the claws, the heavy gravity, the meat, all of it. Anna let out a breath. A long sigh that seemed to deflate the tension in her shoulders. She turned her hand again, interlacing her thick fingers with his slender ones. The fit was awkward, imperfect, but strong. You are arrogant for a small thing, she said, but she was smiling. The smile reached her eyes this time. I'm a business major, Roger replied, smiling back. Arrogance is a prerequisite. They ate the rest of the meal in a comfortable silence, hand in hand. Roger learned to cut his steak with one hand so he didn't have to let go of her. The food filled him, the heat of the room soaked into his bones, and the presence of Anna settled around him like a heavy blanket. He realized something then, a shift in his own internal landscape. For weeks, he had been viewing this relationship through the lens of transaction. She gives protection, I give strategy. She gives food, I give tutoring. It was a safe way to categorize it. It kept feelings out of the equation. But as he sat there, watching the firelight from the heating element dance in her eyes, he realized the ledger had been burned. He wasn't calculating anymore. He wasn't thinking about the social credit boost he got from being with her. He was just thinking about how much he liked the rough texture of her palm. He was thinking about how the sound of her breathing was the most soothing white noise he had ever heard. He was thinking that he would happily eat steak every day for the rest of his life if it meant he could sit across from her. He was falling in love with the wolf, and for the first time, he accepted that she was falling in love with the endurance hunter. When the plates were empty, Anna stood up. She pulled him up with her. She didn't let go of his hand. She led him away from the table, toward the viewport that looked out over the station's exterior. The stars were thick out there, a dense field of light against the void. Below them, the curvature of the planet Nexa turned slowly, a marble of blue and green. "It is a big galaxy," Anna said quietly, looking out at the stars. "It is," Roger agreed. "My family, they will not understand you," she said. "They will see your size, they will see your lack of fur, they will think I have adopted a pet." Roger shrugged. "Let them think that. Until I negotiate the mineral rights to their hunting grounds and triple their clan's wealth in a fiscal quarter, then they'll call me whatever I want them to call me." Anna laughed. It was a bark of genuine amusement. "You would do that? You would face the clan elders. They are not like Torian. They do not care about university rules. They are old. They are traditional. They bite first." "I'll wear armor," Roger said lightly, "or I'll just stand behind you. That's what partners do, right? We cover each other's blind spots. You handle the physical threats. I handle the abstract ones." Anna turned to him. She lifted her free hand and placed it on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it beating. It was steady, rhythmic, unafraid. "Partners," she whispered. She leaned down. This time she didn't stop. She pressed her forehead against his, a gesture of intimacy that was overwhelming. Roger closed his eyes, breathing in her scent, feeling the immense power of her body radiating against his. He felt small, yes. He would always be small compared to her, but he didn't feel weak. He felt amplified. He felt like he had been plugged into a power source that could light up a city. There was no kiss. Not yet. That felt too human, too simple. This was something older. This was the mingling of breath, the sharing of heat, the silent agreement of two species finding a common language in the dark. It was the pact of the pack. "You should stay," Anna said, her voice a low rumble in her chest. "The transport lifts to the human sector are unreliable at this hour, and I have extra blankets." Roger opened his eyes. He looked up at her. He knew what she was asking. It wasn't about sex. It was about proximity. It was about the sleep pile. It was about the comfort of waking up and knowing the other was still there, that they hadn't shattered or blown away in the night. "I'll stay," Roger said. Anna nodded, satisfied. She moved toward the bed, pulling him gently along. The structure was huge, a vast expanse of furs and heated pillows. She climbed in first, settling into the nest she had built. She patted the space beside her. It looked like enough room for 3 humans. Roger kicked off his shoes. He climbed up onto the platform. The furs were soft, incredibly deep and warm. He settled in, feeling swallowed by the bedding. Anna shifted, curling her body around him. She didn't crush him. She spooned him, her massive arm draping over his waist, pulling him back against her chest. She was a furnace, a living, breathing wall of muscle and fur. Roger lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. He felt the weight of her arm, heavy and possessive. He listened to the slow, deep rhythm of her breathing as she drifted towards sleep. He thought about the spreadsheet he had started, project, more meat. He realized he needed to delete it. You don't manage a project like this. You live it. He closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, the silence of his mind was gone. It was replaced by the steady thrum of the station and the heartbeat of the woman holding him. He wasn't the human business major anymore. He wasn't the outlier. He was the anchor. And as he drifted off to sleep, wrapped in the arms of a nightmare who thought he was the most precious thing in the universe, Roger knew that he would never be hungry again. The transformation was complete. The prey had become the partner. And the future, whatever it held, was going to be loud, dangerous, and very, very well fed. The semester ended not with a bang, but with the grinding halt of the academic machine, as thousands of students simultaneously exhaled the stress of finals week. The air in the NextU station changed overnight. The frantic energy of cramming and caffeine consumption evaporated, replaced by the chaotic, joyful noise of exodus. Students were packing bags, booking shuttle transports, and saying goodbye to friends they would not see for a standard galactic rotation. The corridors were clogged with luggage drones and weeping parents who had come to collect their offspring. It was a time of transition, a time when the temporary alliances of the school year usually dissolved into the vacuum of the holiday break. But for Roger, this was not an end. It was a deadline for a different kind of project. He stood in the center of the main cafeteria, the very place where his life had been commandeered by a wolf girl 3 months ago, but today the script was different. Today, he was not the one staring at a budget menu with despair. He was the one waiting. He had arrived 40 minutes early. He had secured the table, their table, the one near the waste recyclers that had become their sovereign territory, and he had defended it against a group of freshman reptoids with nothing more than a sharp glare and the reputation he had acquired as the wolf tamer. They had scurried away the moment they recognized him. It was a heady feeling, knowing that his proximity to Anna had granted him a level of intimidation that his physical stature had no business possessing. But today wasn't about intimidation. It was about gratitude. It was about closing the loop. Roger checked the time on his datapad. Anna's final structural engineering exam finished in 3 minutes. She would be hungry. She was always hungry after using her brain, claiming that calculus burned more calories than combat. On the table in front of him sat a tray that was covered by a thermal stasis lid. It was massive, occupying nearly half the surface area of the table. Roger had spent the last 2 weeks orchestrating the logistics for what lay beneath that lid. He had bartered with a Tellarite smuggler for the ingredients. He had called in a favor from a culinary arts major who specialized in carnivore preparation. He had spent nearly every credit of his end-of-term stipend to ensure that this meal was perfect. It was a gamble. It was a declaration. It was the endurance hunter proving that he could provide for the pack just as well as the alpha could. The doors to the academic sector hissed open, and a flood of students poured into the cafeteria, desperate for post-exam sustenance. Roger watched the crowd, filtering the visual noise until he saw her. Anna towered above the stream of bodies like a lighthouse in a storm. She looked exhausted. Her ears were drooping slightly, her fur was mussed, and her shoulders were slumped under the weight of her backpack and the intellectual trauma of advanced load-bearing physics. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She was scanning the room, her nose twitching, filtering the scents of 1,000 species until she locked onto his. Her head snapped up. Her hazel eyes found him instantly across the sea of heads. The fatigue didn't vanish, but it softened. Her ears perked up. She adjusted her bag and began to cut through the crowd. It was always impressive to watch her move through a dense population. She didn't shove. She simply existed with such density and purpose that the crowd parted around her like water around the prow of a ship. She reached the table and dropped her heavy bag onto the floor with a thud that vibrated through the soles of Roger's shoes. She slumped into the chair opposite him, letting out a long, groaning sigh that sounded like a deflating tire on a mining truck. "I hate bridges," she announced without preamble. "I hate trusses. I hate tension cables. If I ever see another vector diagram, I will eat the professor." Roger smiled. He had missed this. Even though he had seen her that morning, he missed the immediate, unfiltered reality of her presence. "Did you pass?" he asked. Anna rubbed her face with her massive hands, her claws clicking against her forehead. "I passed. I crushed the exam, but my brain feels like it has been put through a molecular sieve. I need protein, Roger. I need to consume something that had a mother." She reached for her datapad to summon the menu, her movements sluggish and heavy. "Don't bother," Roger said, reaching out and placing his hand on top of the thermal lid. Anna stopped. She looked at the lid, then at Roger. Her nose twitched. The seal on the stasis lid was good, but it wasn't perfect. A faint wisp of aroma escaped, carrying the scent of deep smoke, gamey richness, and a specific blend of spices that made her pupils dilute instantly. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dropping to a suspicious whisper. "For 3 months you have been feeding me," Roger said, his voice steady. "You decided I was too thin. You decided I was fragile. You spent your own credits to make sure I survived the semester. You called it an investment." He paused, looking her dead in the eye. "The fiscal quarter is over, Anna. It is time to pay the dividends. He hit the release stud on the thermal lid. The cover hissed and retracted, revealing the feast beneath. It was a roast haunch of sky elk. It wasn't the synthetic stuff the cafeteria served. This was real. The bone was thick and curved. The meat was dark purple and glistening with rendered fat, and it was crusted with crushed juniper berries and rock salt. It was surrounded by a ring of roasted marrow bones and those high-caloric tubers she loved. It was a meal fit for a clan chieftain returning from a winter campaign. It was primal, expensive, and absolutely magnificent. Anna stared at the meat. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stared at it, her mouth falling open slightly. She inhaled, a long, shuddering breath that pulled the scent deep into her lungs. She looked up at Roger, her expression oscillating between shock and a hunger so profound it looked painful. "Sky elk," she whispered, "this is. Roger, this is import restricted. You cannot get this on the station. How did you?" "I know a guy who knows a guy who runs a transport through the RIM systems," Roger said dismissively, waving his hand as if interstellar smuggling was a standard part of the business curriculum. "Logistics, Anna. It's what I do. I move assets from where they are plentiful to where they are needed. And right now, you need this." He picked up the carving knife, the heavy iron one he had borrowed, and sliced a thick slab of the meat. He placed it on her plate. "Eat," he commanded. It was the first time he had used that tone with her. It was a direct echo of her own command from their first lunch. He used the same inflection, the same protective authority. Anna looked at him. Her eyes were wide, shimmering with moisture. For a lycanthrope, food was language. Giving someone food was affection. Giving someone this food, a delicacy from her own world, something that tasted of home and history, was a sonnet. It was a declaration that he saw her. He didn't just see the big, scary wolf girl. He saw the homesick student who missed the wind in the canyons. He saw the warrior who was tired of fighting with math. She picked up the meat with her hands. Forks were insufficient for this level of emotion, and took a bite. She closed her eyes. A low rumble started in her chest, deeper and louder than any purr Roger had heard before. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated bliss. She chewed slowly, savoring the taste of the RIM worlds, the taste of home. When she opened her eyes, they were focused entirely on Roger. The intensity of her gaze made the rest of the cafeteria vanish. "You are a dangerous creature," she said softly, licking a drop of juice from her thumb. "You feed the predator. That is not how the stories go, Roger. The human is supposed to run away." "I told you," Roger said, cutting another slice and placing it on her plate. "I'm an endurance hunter. I don't run away. I wait until the target is tired and then I make my move." "And what is your move?" she asked, leaning forward over the table, the remains of the sky elk forgotten for a moment. Roger set the knife down. He clasped his hands in front of him, resting them on the table. This was it, the final negotiation. "The semester is over," he said. "Most of the humans are taking the shuttle back to the Sol system. My ticket is booked for 800 hours tomorrow." Anna flinched. It was a small movement, just a tightening of the muscles around her eyes, but Roger saw it. The light in her face dimmed. She looked down at the table. "Oh," she said, her voice was flat. "Of course, Earth, it is. Safe there, warm, you should go. The winter break is long, you will need to recharge." She picked up a bone, turning it over in her hands, not looking at him. "I will stay here," she muttered. "The flight to my world is too expensive this cycle, and I have reading to do. I will be fine. I will send you messages. I will make sure you are eating." She was retreating. She was putting the armor back on. She was preparing for the solitude of a month in an empty dorm, convincing herself that she didn't need the pack. Roger reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a thin, transparent data chip and slid it across the table. It clicked against the metal surface, sliding until it hit the bone she was holding. Anna looked at it. It was a travel manifest. "I canceled my ticket to Earth," Roger said. Anna looked up, confusion wrinkling her snout. "You, what?" "I canceled it," Roger repeated. and I used the refund plus my savings to buy 2 tickets on the heavy freighter Iron Heart. It departs at noon tomorrow. Destination, the Fenris system. Anna froze. She stared at him, her mouth agape. Fenris was her home system. It was a high-gravity, high-hazard world of jagged mountains, endless forests and storms that could strip paint off a hull. It was not a place for tourists. It was certainly not a place for a 160-pound human with no fur. "You cannot go to Fenris," she said, her voice rising in panic. "Roger, are you insane? The gravity is 1.4 standard. The air is thin. The temperatures drop to 40 below zero at night. My brothers will try to wrestle you. My father will try to intimidate you. The wildlife will try to eat you. You will die." "I bought a localized gravity assist suit," Roger countered calmly. "I have thermal underlayers rated for Arctic survival. And as for your brothers and your father—" He smiled, that sharp, calculating smile that he used when he had cornered a market. "I have a case of Terran whiskey and a drive loaded with blueprints for efficient fortress construction. I think I can negotiate a non-aggression pact." Anna stared at him. She looked at the ticket. She looked at his face. She was trying to process the magnitude of what he was proposing. He wasn't just walking her home. He was entering her world. He was voluntarily stepping into the one place where he would be the most vulnerable just to be with her. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why would you do that? It is loud. It is dangerous. It is not safe." "Because you're going to be there," Roger said simply, "and a pack doesn't split up for the winter." The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of awkwardness. It was the silence of a structure settling into its foundation. It was the sound of a question being answered once and for all. Roger saw the walls come down behind her eyes. He saw the fear of abandonment vanish, replaced by a fierce, blinding joy. "You are insane," she whispered, shaking her head. "A tiny, fragile, insane human." "I prefer committed partner," Roger corrected. Anna let out a laugh that was half-sob. She reached across the table, ignoring the food, ignoring the decorum, ignoring the staring students. She grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him toward her. Roger went willingly, leaning over the table until their foreheads touched. "You will have to sleep in my furs," she murmured against his skin, "to keep warm." "I was counting on it," Roger replied. "You will have to eat what the clan eats," she warned. "No nutrient paste, just meat." "I think I can handle that," he said. She pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. Her expression was fierce, proud, and possessive. "If you die, Roger, I will be very angry with you." "I don't plan on dying, Anna. I plan on enduring." She grinned, revealing all those sharp, terrifying teeth that he had grown to love. She let him go, sitting back in her chair with a renewed energy. She looked at the sky elk. She looked at the ticket. She looked at the man who had brought them both. "Eat," she commanded, pushing the platter toward him. "You will need the energy. My mother is going to ask you 1,000 questions, and she cooks with spices that can melt steel. We need to build up your tolerance." Roger picked up his fork. He cut a piece of the meat. He took a bite. It was gamey, strong, and tasted of wild places. It tasted like a challenge. It tasted like the future. They ate together as the station emptied around them. They were an island in the stream of departures. Other students were going home to their parents, to their safe, familiar worlds. Roger was going into the unknown. He was going to a world of monsters and storms, armed only with a gravity suit and a business degree, and he had never been more excited in his life. When the meal was finished, they gathered their things. Anna slung her heavy bag over one shoulder as if it weighed nothing. Roger picked up his smaller, neater satchel. They walked toward the exit side by side. The dynamic had settled into something permanent. They weren't just students anymore. They weren't just friends. They were a unit. As they reached the airlock doors that led to the shuttle bays, Anna paused. She looked down at him, her shadow engulfing him, warm and familiar. "Roger." "Yes, Anna." You realize that once you meet the clan, you cannot leave. Once you share the hearth fire, you are pack. There is no transfer paperwork. There is no refund policy. I know, Roger said. I read the fine print. Good, Anna said. She reached out and took his hand. Her grip was firm, enveloping his small hand completely. She didn't squeeze too hard. She didn't have to. He wasn't going anywhere. Ready for the gravity? She asked. Roger adjusted his glasses. He looked at the wolf girl who had fed him, protected him, and now, finally, accepted him. Lead the way, he said. They stepped through the doors together, walking into the bright, harsh lights of the hangar bay. The Iron Heart was waiting. The future was waiting. It was going to be cold. It was going to be dangerous. And Roger knew with absolute certainty that it was going to require a lot more meat. And for the first time in the history of the Nexiu Business School, the human didn't just survive the semester. He won the game. He squeezed Anna's hand, and she squeezed back, a silent promise between the hunter and the wolf. Let's go home.